Okay, so there's a Hasidic saying that goes that to fool another person is immoral, but to fool yourself is foolish. And there's nothing very smart about fooling a fool. So if you fool others, you're immoral, but if you fool yourself, you're a fool. And to fool a fool is no big deal. Which basically says that we're here to be honest with ourselves. You've got to be honest. And one of the things that the book of Tanya really is trying to do is to help us be honest with ourselves. Make a real self-appraisal that is hard-hitting, that is no holds barred, and really opening up ourselves and being honest with ourselves to discover where we really are and where we should be. And so if we're really honest with ourselves, as we've tried to be, as we're going through the chapters of Tanya, we've discovered now what a Beinoni is, what level a Beinoni really means. That a tzaddik, we met earlier in Tanya, means a person who's completely righteous, who's conquered their animal soul. A rasha, a wicked person, is somebody who is still stuck in evil, doing the wrong thing. A Beinoni is somebody who's always doing the right thing. They're still struggling, they still have temptations, but they're always doing the right thing. So if our choice is between these three categories, a rasha who does evil, a tzaddik who does no evil and doesn't even want to do evil, and a Beinoni who doesn't do evil but is still tempted to do evil, the question where we would fit into this, not just where we are currently, but where could we possibly hope to be in the scale of tzaddik, Beinoni and rasha? For most of us, we would say that we are doomed to be a rasha for the rest of our lives. That to ever get to even to the level of Beinoni seems so out of our reach. As I told you the story a couple of weeks ago, that there was an individual that the Rebbe identified as a Beinoni, implying that they're not all over the place either. And so while Tanya quotes what the Talmud says, that the tzaddikim are very few and scattered through the generations, surely Beinonim are also pretty sparse. To be a person who always does the right thing, even if you're not always ready to do the right thing, even if you don't always feel like it, even that seems like an extremely high level. In chapter 14 in Tanya, Rabbi Shneur Zalman attempts to address this question: can I really be a Beinoni? Who is this Beinoni level for? Who should be aiming for it? If we've already given up on being a tzaddik, should we also be giving up on being a Beinoni and settle for the fact that we are a rasha for the rest of our lives? So we'll see in chapter 14 what is attainable for us and what is not, what's beyond us. In this, we're going to answer the question: how do we keep our promise that our souls made before we came down into this world? If you recall, Tanya quotes at the very beginning in chapter 1 that every soul before coming into this world makes a promise. The promise that we're made to say is, be a tzaddik and do not be a rasha. We made an oath, a shvuah, an oath: I will be a tzaddik, I will not be a rasha. So how are we supposed to keep that promise? Now that we've learned what a tzaddik is, we made an oath, our soul made an oath to be a tzaddik. How can we possibly keep that, let alone not being a rasha? And so this we're going to see by delving into chapter 14. Chapter 14 starts with the answer and says, the level of Beinoni is one that is attainable by every person, and we should all strive after it. Meaning there is nobody who cannot be a Beinoni. It's not out of anybody's reach, and therefore we should all be striving for that. Anyone, at any time or moment, can be a Beinoni, because the Beinoni does not revile evil, only turns away from evil and does good in actual practice, in deed, speech, and thought, wherein the choice, ability, and freedom are given to every person to act, speak, and think, even what is contrary to the desire of your heart and diametrically opposed to it. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman puts it down very straight and says, we can all be Beinoni. Any one of us can be a Beinoni. It's totally within our reach. It's attainable, and that's what we should be striving for. This should be our life mission, to try and be a Beinoni. He says that anyone at any time or moment, any time means any time of your life, any moment means any particular second of the day, can be a Beinoni. Meaning that it's not something that you have to wait until you're old and too weak to fulfill your desires anymore. It's not something that you have to be young and energetic for. Every time in your life, at any stage in your life, you can be a Beinoni, you can reach this level. And not only that, but any moment of the day. It's not just on the weekends or at certain times of the day or the afternoon that you can be a Beinoni, but other times not. It's not just when you're tired and can't be bothered sinning that you're a Beinoni, but it's when you're energetic and when you're awake, when you're exhausted and tired. Any moment of any day throughout your life, you can maintain the level of Beinoni. It is totally within your reach. How so? If a Beinoni is somebody who never sins, who of us can say that we can reach that level? Who of us can say that we're ever there? So let's be clear again. The Beinoni does not revile evil. It's not that you're on a level where you're disgusted and put off by doing the wrong thing. A Beinoni is quite tempted to do evil. However, when it comes to practice, they don't do it. They control their behavior. And behavior means deed, speech, and thought. Actions that we do, words that we say, and thoughts that we think. All of those three are in our control. We have choice, the ability and freedom to every person to act, speak, and think, even that which is contrary to the desire of your heart. In fact, diametrically opposed to it. You can do the opposite of what you want to do. Your behavior, your actions are totally in your hands. And therefore, there is no excuse at any time to not be a Beinoni. There's no day or time of the year or time of your life that you can say, well, this is an exception. I can't control myself now. That's not true. We always have control. We're always responsible for our actions, for our behavior. So while the desires of the heart are not so much in our hands, the behavior, meaning active thoughts we choose to think, the words that we choose to say, and the deeds that we choose to perform is totally in our hands. And so therefore, Beinoni is something that is realistic, is attainable, and it is our aim. So here in chapter 14, after we've already met in detail the tzaddik, the rasha, and the Beinoni, we know what each one of these three, what they're about, what they do, what they've achieved. We know who they are. Now, in 14, Rabbi Shnei Zalman says, and for most of us, this is our goal. This is our ambition. Your spiritual ambition is to be a Beinoni. Not to be a tzaddik, that you can forget about. That's not for you. But to be a Beinoni, totally yes. It is absolutely within your reach. Now, going further into this, Tanya now offers, in the next section, a meditation in the form of an internal dialogue, or monologue really, that we budding Beinonim can use to control our negative impulses and do the right thing even when we are tempted otherwise. Until now, Rabbi Shnei Zalman has told us we can do it, that it is totally possible to control your urges. You want to do one thing, you don't have to do it, you can do something else. So you may have an urge to say something that is inappropriate. You have a chance to make a joke, and that joke will be very funny and get laughs, but it will insult somebody, it will put them down, or it will make somebody feel embarrassed. So you have a moral choice there to get the cheap laugh, or to do the right thing and just hold back and not say it. Now, those who enjoy a good joke know how difficult it is not to say one when you've got a good line. When you've got it there and the timing's perfect, to hold yourself back and not say it is extremely difficult. So too, the same would be with speaking words of gossip. That when you have some juicy information about somebody that you'd love to share, there is a certain pleasure that we get about talking about other people and speaking about their flaws. It makes us feel better by dragging others down, or sometimes it's just the enjoyment of getting in other people's business. This is a sin. It's called lashon hara, evil speak, evil talk. It's not allowed. We're not allowed to do that. Even if it's true, even if it's fact, we're not supposed to gossip about other people. Yet there is a certain pleasure in doing it. When you have a bit of information that you've heard about somebody, to share it is very tempting. To not say it for the gossip is a very challenging thing to do. So too when it comes to evil thoughts, like we've discussed many times, thoughts pop into your head that you don't have control over. But to entertain and continue that thought, that's in your hands. But that's not easy. When you have an evil thought, a wrong thought, it's tempting to entertain that thought, to stick with it, to stay with that thought. When you feel jealous about somebody else, jealousy is something that is really in the heart and in the mind. You're not necessarily doing anything about your jealousy, but you're feeling jealous. You see somebody else who has been successful in whatever area that you are yet to be successful, and you feel jealous about it, about that person. And you might have an evil thought about that person having their downfall, about them losing what they have. It's not a nice thought, but we, in our weakness, enjoy sometimes these thoughts. If it pops into your head, that's one thing. You brush it away. But once it's there, it's not easy to brush it away, to sometimes think of your enemy's downfall or somebody that you're jealous of losing what they have. It's an evil thought, but it's one that we're tempted to have. And even when it comes to action, when it comes to doing things, we sometimes have right in front of us the opportunity to do something that will give us a certain pleasure or gratification or advantage in the short term, but it is an immoral act. It's wrong to do it. And if we do it, we have transgressed God's moral code. And yet it's sometimes very, very tempting to do exactly that. And to hold back and not do it is excruciating. It can be extremely hard. Whether it be the opportunity to cut a corner in business, where you have an opportunity to do a little bit of a deal that will indeed be slightly dishonest and will not be totally above board, but you're going to make a lot of money out of it. Somebody wants to buy something off you. They don't know all the details. They don't know all the facts of what they're buying from you. They never asked. They didn't actually ask all the facts. And so, do you have to tell them everything? It's a shady area. I mean, they should do their due diligence. They have to check it out. But is it up to me to tell them everything? So you may be doing a slight little bit of a dodgy act there, and it's very tempting to do it. You're gonna sell and finished, make a lot of money and move on. But the bottom line is, you've done a dishonest deed. It's extremely tempting to do it. To hold yourself back and not do it takes real inner strength and courage. And each one of us can think of the exact areas where we have our weaknesses and we have fallen, and we find it difficult to control ourselves. It doesn't need much elaboration. That part, Rabbi Shneur Zalman doesn't need to explain. What he needs to explain is what he just said, that we can all be a Beinoni at any time, any moment, any time of our life. We are able to control our thoughts, our speech, and our action in order to never actually do that which is immoral. That while the temptation might be there, the urge is there, but following through on that urge, we can control it at any time. What Rabbi Shneur Zalman is going to do now, and he does this throughout Tanya, we're going to see many of these, is a type of meditation. In the Hasidic sense, a meditation means to ponder deeply on something, to allow your mind to focus on an idea and really bring it down, make it real for yourself. And so here is a meditation which is in the form of an internal monologue. It's talking to yourself. It's actually addressing your animal soul in a way, and trying to stop the passage from urge to deed, from having the temptation or the urge to do something wrong to actually fulfilling that urge and doing it, to try and interrupt that passage. This is a suggested contemplation or monologue you can have with yourself to control those negative impulses and to not do it even though you're tempted. Let's have a look at how chapter 14, Rabbi Shneur Zalman presents this monologue. He says the following. You should say to yourself, I will not be wicked even for a moment, because I will not, heaven forbid, allow myself to be disconnected from the one God under any circumstances. So the first sentence is, even for a moment I won't be wicked, because the tactic of the negative impulse is to tell you that just doing one little thing in the scheme of things is not so bad. Think about how good you are all the other times. Think about how well behaved you've been until now. To have one little infraction, one little minor misdemeanor in your moral life is not all that big deal. Nobody's perfect. Everyone has their flaws, and so it's just going to be a small little lapse in your moral life. It's not such a big deal. The response has to be, I will not be wicked even for a moment. Not even for one moment. Why? Because I will not, heaven forbid, allow myself to be disconnected from the one God under any circumstances. Even if it's for one moment of disconnection from God is like an eternity. Because if God is the source of my existence, if the God is the truth, is my true reality, being disconnected from my truth, from my reality, from God, doesn't matter if it's for a moment or for a decade or for a millennia. It's an infinite moment, because I'm disconnecting from my truth. And so how long it is, how much time it is irrelevant. And so this is the first thing we call out to our animal soul. I refuse to be wicked for a moment. I'm not going for that argument that I'm good the rest of the time. It's unacceptable to be disconnected from God even for a moment under any circumstances. Indeed, he continues, my deepest desire is to unite my soul with him by expressing my soul in the three garments, in action, speech, and thought, dedicated to God, his Torah and his commandments. That my deepest desire, my truest desire, is to be connected to God. And so what you, animal soul, are suggesting that I do now is do an act that will disconnect me from my deepest desire, from my truest self, from what I really want. You are going against what I truly want. This is because I have an innate love of God that is hidden in my heart. This is my Jewish soul. The Jewish soul, as we studied earlier in Tanya from chapter 2, the whole identity of the Jewish soul, the gift of a Jewish soul, is a divine soul that yearns to be connected to God, to truth. That is my true identity. That's my deepest self. That's the definition of being Jewish, yearning to connect with God. And this is the gift of being Jewish. And so for me to go against that is going against my true self, going against what I truly want, because what I want is that my soul should be expressed through the garments of action and speech and thought, the three garments that we studied earlier in Tanya. By connecting those three garments to God through mitzvahs, through Torah study, and through doing commandments, that is my deepest yearning. That's what I want to be, connected to God and nothing else. And so you, animal soul, are coming and suggesting the exact opposite of that I should do an act, albeit a short-lived one, that will disconnect me from my truth, from God. It's out of the question. It's unacceptable. You're asking me to go against my innate true nature. So far what this little monologue has presented to us, there's more to it, we'll see in a minute, but what it's presented to us already is a bit of a strategy, an approach to confront our animal soul. What's fascinating here is that what Rabbi Shneur Zalman is suggesting is that a way to win your battle with your animal soul, with your darker side and your lower urges, is to talk it out, to address it, to speak to it, to actually put into words your counter-argument against the animal soul's urges. Why would that be helpful? Why could this slow down the process? Well, first of all, slowing down is number one. As we've discussed, the animal soul always wants things to happen urgently. Its urges have to be expressed immediately. It doesn't want you to think. It doesn't want you to weigh things up, to debate back and forth. It just has an instantaneous urge. You've got to fulfill it right now. So by stopping and arguing, you're already countering that urgency of the animal soul, that you've got to do it right now. You've got to fulfill this desire immediately. And so in those examples that we spoke about before, when you have a joke that will be very funny, except for one person who's going to be very offended and hurt by it, if you delay that for a few moments and say, do I want to do something that will disconnect me from truth and from God? Do I want to hurt another human being, which makes me a disunity in the world as opposed to a unifying power in the world? When you slow that process down, it loses its shine already. It's not so tempting anymore to do it after that moment has passed. So just by slowing down the process, by fighting, by debating with the animal soul, that's already partially a victory. But more than that, by verbalizing the divine soul's argument, you're giving it a voice. You're giving it a bit more weight. The animal soul is so prevalent in our consciousness. It is so primary and so loud in the way we operate that the divine soul is sometimes just drowned out. It's not given a chance. And so even though when we have this situation where we're tempted to do the wrong thing, we do have a sense that we're doing something wrong. The divine soul's voice is somewhere in the background saying, hey, that's not right, the right thing to do. But the animal soul's push to just do it is so much louder. is so much more primary in our consciousness that sometimes the divine soul could just be drowned out. By stopping and giving the divine soul words, by expressing what the divine soul wants, by putting it in verbalizing it, then you're equalizing the playing field a little bit more and having a chance to overcome that animal soul. Rather than leaving it as unspoken guilt for doing the wrong thing, or a vague sense of what's right and wrong that's not expressed, here you're putting it into clear words. This gives an energy, a strength to your divine soul to stop that flow from temptation to action, that you're not going to do it. And so by stating what to the divine soul is obvious, but what to our conscious mind is not always obvious, that my deepest desire is to unite my soul with God. Most of us, if we would just be stopped in the middle of the street by, let's say there'd be the ABC, doing a documentary on people's deepest desires, and stopping people on the street and saying, so excuse me, what's your deepest desire in life? What is your deepest desire? So what type of stuff would we come up with? What do you think the average person would say? What's your deepest desire? Money? Peace on earth? Health? Happiness? Right, for most people, yeah, health, myself and my family, peace in the world, happiness, I should be happy, I could do with a bit more money. These for most people you would say this is your deepest desire. And we would all put them, that's pretty much up there, in whatever particular order. They're the things that we want. Comes along Tanya and says, well, no, they are desires, but they're not your deepest desires. Your deepest desire is to connect to God. In fact, all of those things are really corollaries to that. They're means to connect to God. You need to be healthy to connect to God. In this world, we need money to survive. We need those things. Happiness is a means, not an end, but a means to connect to God. All these things are necessary. But what our deepest desire is, what we're all running after, what we're really chasing after, is a relationship with God. That is our deepest desire. Now, for most people, if you would tell them after they told you that their deepest desire is health and wealth and happiness, you told them, no, actually, your deepest desire is to connect to God. They would say, I'm sorry, you got the wrong person. Most people would say, well, I don't know what you're talking about. Some people might say, yeah, okay, that's maybe one of my desires, but my deepest desire. Most people wouldn't identify that as their deepest desire. But that's because most people are going around very much in the clutches of the animal soul and very disconnected from the divine soul. The divine soul has its moments in our life, but not necessarily is it prevalent, is it the primary voice. And so therefore we don't hear it. But when you start hearing the divine soul, this is all it's about. Connecting to God is what our deepest desire really is. What Rabbi Shneur Zalman here is trying to do is give the voice to that divine soul. That this is your real deepest desire. This is what you're really chasing after. When you think you're chasing after attention and love and meaning and justice and all these things, it's really, you want God. You're seeking God in all the various different manifestations of that. This is what we're really doing. And the way you find God is through fulfilling the mitzvahs. That brings goodness into the world. That brings blessing into the world. That brings happiness to the world. This is what it's about. This is how we do it. But your true desire is to connect to God. By expressing that, even when you're not fully convinced of it, on your conscious mind, you're not fully convinced that your deepest desire is to connect to God. But by saying those words, you are expressing a deeper truth, a truth that you may not be consciously aware of, but your divine soul is very much aware of, because your divine soul just wants to connect to God. As we're going to see in the next coming chapters of Tanya, that when we get to know our divine soul a bit better and its yearnings, that it just wants to be connected to God. And so this is expressing a truth, even if it's one we're not fully aware of. And that's the last sentence, that I have an innate love for God. It's hidden in my heart. It's hidden beneath my other desires, my other things that I'm chasing after. But beneath all of that is a yearning to connect to God. This is what it's really about. This is what my real drive, inner drive is. And that's my Jewish soul. That's the divine soul that wants to be connected to God. And so I'm not willing to do something that will go against my deepest desire, my truest self. And that is what my animal soul is trying to get me to do. So this is the protest that we throw at the animal soul to try and slow it down in order to block its ability to make us act on its desires. Any comments or questions so far? Yeah.
The examples you gave earlier about the speaking Lashon Hara, so that's not an immediate need like food or whatever. So does that mean to say that the Yetzer Hara sort of knows that that's a mitzvah and will actually invest the time to weaken the person spiritually as well?
What do you mean? That as opposed to what?
Why does the Yetzer Hara sort of give a person the urge to speak Lashon Hara? What does it get out of that?
Okay, well, the Yetzer Hara, which is the evil inclination, which is an extension or a part of the animal soul, what it wants is self-gratification. And in the case of Lashon Hara, there is a certain gratification that is experienced from speaking bad of other people. It pulls them off their high horse in your mind, and it makes you feel better than them, right? And so, of course, it's dysfunctional. Doesn't work. Doesn't actually make you feel better, but the animal soul feels a certain gratification from speaking bad about others. So, generally speaking, we only do something sinful because there's some gain that we're getting out of it. We're getting some twisted gain from it. We don't do it altruistically. We don't do evil for evil's sake. We do evil because there's something that we get gain from it. It could play into our ego, our insecurity, or whatever it might be, or it might just feel good in a temporary way. So that's really what the evil inclination is trying to get us to do. It wouldn't do it for any other reason, right? That's why I'm not going to sin for your ego. You know, I'm not going to do something that will gratify you. That my animal soul is not interested in. It's what will gratify me. Any other questions for now? Okay, so let's continue in our monologue then. So after confronting the animal soul and saying, I refuse to be wicked for one moment, to go against what my deepest desire is, and that is to connect to God, to negate my Jewish soul, which has an innate desire to connect. I'm not going to go against that. Continues this monologue with a fascinating idea. Even those Jews who are the least devoted to Judaism would give up their lives for being Jewish. As we've seen throughout history, that to give up your Jewishness is something that even Jews who didn't live all that Jewishly were willing to die Jewish. They were willing to die as Jews. They would not give up their Judaism even if it cost their life. We'll see how this is relevant in a minute. It is just that a spirit of nonsense overcomes them, and they imagine that committing a sin will not affect their Jewishness, and their soul will not be disconnected from the God of Israel, and they lose touch with the love of God which is hidden in their heart. But as for me, I have no desire to be such a fool and deny the truth. What's he saying here? This is a fascinating insight. That it is a historical fact that Jewish people have been willing to die as Jews throughout history, and sadly have had that opportunity many, many times. Throughout our history, there have been oppressive nations who have come to us and threatened our annihilation unless we convert to this or that religion, or unless we negate our Jewishness and join the majority. And time again, Jewish people have been willing to die as Jews rather than survive and deny the Jewishness. And so this has been a feature of Jewish history, that in every generation, as we say in the Haggadah, in every generation somebody stands against us to annihilate us. There's always some enemy that is trying to blot out Judaism from the world, and Jews have by and large been willing to withstand that test and stay Jewish rather than die. There have been exceptions, of course. There have been Jews who have converted to other religions in order to save their lives, but the overwhelming majority throughout history have chosen death over losing their Jewishness, over conversion. Now, what's interesting about this is that there's something unique about the Jewish version of this that you don't find in other nations and other religions. There are many people of other religions who have also been threatened to lose their life or if they don't convert. And there are other religions who have also people of other religions who have chosen to die rather than convert to another religion. That's not unique to Judaism. What is unique to Judaism is that many of the people who died for being Jewish didn't live all that Jewishly in the first place. That they may have been Jewish by birth, they may have had that identity on some vague level, but on a day-to-day basis, they didn't necessarily live a Jewish life. There were people who didn't keep kosher, didn't keep Shabbos, didn't keep the festivals, did not have a religious home, and yet, when they were told to convert out of Judaism, they were ready to die rather than do that. This is a little bit odd, because we can understand why somebody who has a very deep conviction towards their religion, somebody who's committed to it in their daily life, somebody who has put all of their energies into following a creed and following a belief and living by it, somebody like that, when you threaten them, convert or die, okay, if they really mean it, if they really believe it, so then they're going to stick to their beliefs rather than give it up. But somebody who doesn't live that way, somebody who's not committed to it, somebody who's not even sure if they believe in all this stuff, that person, when you say convert or die, it should be a no-brainer. Why would they not convert to another religion to save their life? If they're not all that committed to their current religion anyway, they're not living it, so surely to save your life, it's worth just going for it, just convert and move on. And yet we find that has overwhelmingly been not the case. That Jews who were unobservant in their daily life, often not even very knowledgeable at all in Judaism, have been willing to give their lives rather than convert out. One classic example of this is during the Inquisition, when thousands of Jews were threatened with death if they would not convert to Catholicism, and they were tortured to death, and they did it. They withstood the test. Indeed, there were some Jews who converted to Catholicism. Many of them did it only on the surface and kept their Judaism in a hidden way, but they were the minority. The greater majority of people did not convert and died. Now, one of the rabbis of the time, known as the Chassid Yavitz, he testified that it wasn't necessarily the scholarly Jews who did it, who withstood the test. Even the simplest Jews, the ones who were less educated, less learned, they withstood the test. Not only that, but even those who were not all that observant in the first place were willing to die for being Jewish. This is odd. It's strange. It doesn't really make sense from an anthropological perspective. Just looking at the way people behave, it doesn't really work, doesn't really make all that much sense why Jews are willing to die. But spiritually it does make sense, and that is because the Jewish soul is innately bound up with God. And to deny Jewishness is to deny self, is to deny your existence. If what we said earlier, if what Rabbi Shneur Zalman suggested earlier is true, that the deepest desire of a Jew is to be connected to God, so denying your Jewishness, dropping it, and choosing another religion, that is denying your truest self, your deepest self. Even if you're not living it that way, even if you're not living a Jewish life, but to negate your Jewishness, that is too much. That is overboard. Now, in the modern context, we, thank God, most of us living in the Western world have not been faced with any choice, anything like this, convert or die. And so it's not something that we're familiar with on a first-hand basis. However, something that we do see in our world is where a Jew may be told that because of the way they live, they're not Jewish. That because they've chosen a path that is not observant, because they don't go to synagogue, they don't believe in God, they don't keep kosher, they don't observe anything Jewish, so then they have reached a stage where there's nothing that really makes them Jewish anymore, and some have suggested to such people they're not Jewish. You're no longer Jewish. If you have ever done this, or ever heard somebody do this, if you have ever seen an unobservant, disconnected, self-proclaimed, secular, atheist Jew who was told, well, then you're not Jewish anymore. If you don't go to synagogue, if you don't keep any of the festivals, you eat bacon on Yom Kippur, and you have no beliefs, no connections, nothing, no mezuzah on the door, then you're not Jewish. There's nothing that makes you Jewish. You're surely not Jewish. Have you ever seen somebody react to such a suggestion? It will be with vehemence, with anger. How can you have the chutzpah to suggest that I'm not Jewish? And they use the word chutzpah as well. That how can you even suggest that I'm not Jewish? I'm as Jewish as you and as anybody else. That if you would suggest to an unaffiliated Jew that they're not Jewish, but because of their lack of affiliation, because they do nothing Jewish, they would react with venom at such a suggestion. Because a Jew is not willing to disconnect from their Jewishness. There are many Jews who are apathetic about their Jewishness, that are indifferent about it, that are not into it. But if you would come to the crunch and say, so then you're not Jewish anymore, they're not willing to give that away. They're not happy to do that. And Jews will go at great lengths to develop an identity that somehow incorporates Jewishness with whatever they are. So there'll be the atheist Jew or the self-hating Jew or the Jew-boo, the Jew that's into Buddhism. They'll keep the Jew side of it. They won't allow that part to go away. If you ask them why, they might come up with some vague explanation about, well, I'm honoring my tradition, or it's just a fact, or whatever. They themselves won't know why. But Rabbi Shneur Zalman knows why. The Alter Rebbe told us why. Because a Jewish soul will not disconnect from Jewishness. It's like disconnecting from self. It's not possible. It's not a reality. It's not an option. And so no matter where they've gone in their lives, where they've reached, a Jew will remain a Jew always. This is the Jewish identity. So if this is the case, so then how could it be that they are so disconnected on a practical level? How can you say that your Jewishness is your deepest reality, your deepest self? You refuse to disconnect from that under any circumstances. And yet when it comes to practicality, when it comes to day-to-day life, they do nothing Jewish. How can you reconcile being Jewish as being your deepest identity and yet it having zero impact on the way you live? You don't want to be disconnected from God, and yet you do nothing to connect to God. You're not even sure if you believe in Him. How can that be? So this Rabbi Shneur Zalman explained. Let's go through it again. Even those Jews who are the least devoted to Judaism would give up their lives for being Jewish. It is just that a spirit of nonsense overcomes them, and they imagine that committing a sin will not affect their Jewishness, and their soul will not be disconnected from the God of Israel, and they lose touch with the love of God which is hidden in their heart. Meaning that there's this spirit of nonsense. There is an absurd, illogical calculation that they make, and that is that even though I may do things against Judaism, even though I may ignore living the Jewish life and I don't observe anything, but I'm still connected, I'm still Jewish, and therefore it's okay. That by me not doing Jewish things, by me not observing Judaism, by me going against the laws of Judaism, I'm still Jewish, and therefore it doesn't matter. The spirit of folly is that if they would realize that when you go against your Judaism, when you do something that is against Judaism, you're going against yourself, then they would never do such a thing. They wouldn't be willing to do it. It's just that they, in their minds, make a calculation that what I'm doing is not so bad. To convert to another religion, no way. I would never do such a thing. But to eat bacon on Yom Kippur, I'm still Jewish. It's true, you are still Jewish. But if you would realize that in the act that you're doing of eating bacon in Yom Kippur, you're disconnecting from your Jewishness and you're disconnecting from your God, you wouldn't be able to do it. You wouldn't be capable of doing such a thing. It would be the same as converting to another religion. It's just that we make this measured calculation that that's really bad, but this is not so bad. That's totally disconnecting, whereas this isn't really. In actual fact, that's not the case. And as for me, I have no desire to be such a fool and deny that truth. What Rabbi Shneur Zalman here is saying is he's presenting a very profound insight into the Jewish condition, into the Jewish psyche, and presenting an extremely powerful argument against our animal soul that is a foolproof argument. It is guaranteed to work if you do this right. That is, what he's touched upon here is that there is a point in the Jewish soul that refuses to let go, that refuses to disconnect. And this is that point that for most people will come to the fore when they're threatened, convert or die. At that point, they will say no. Maybe they gave up on everything else. When it came to eating not kosher or not keeping the festivals or living a life that has nothing to do with Jewish practice, all those things they justified because, well, I'm still Jewish. But if you give me a choice, leave Judaism or die, I can't leave Judaism. I can't say that I'm not a Jew anymore. It's not possible. And so that's where they draw their line. Or, again, in the more modern context, where we're not talking about being threatened to die, but if you would say to somebody, okay, so you don't keep, even Yom Kippur, you don't fast, you eat non-kosher, yes, no problem. But you're still Jewish, yes. And you don't have a kosher home, no, don't have a kosher home, no. Shabbos, no, we don't do anything. Believing in God, no, don't think so. Nothing. But then, so can we now say that you're not Jewish? If in every area of your life, in your beliefs, in your practices, in your kitchen, in everything that you do, there's nothing Jewish there, we can't identify anything, can we now say you're not Jewish? There they'll draw the line and say, absolutely not, I'm Jewish as anybody else. You can't change that. Because there's a line that the Jew draws that we cannot disconnect from our Jewishness. Says Rabbi Shneur Zalman, that point, which is indestructible in our connection to Judaism, that point, it's merely a nonsense in our mind, it's a justification in our mind that we move that line to that extreme. That as long as you haven't converted out of the religion, you're still connected to your Jewishness. As long as you haven't just dropped being Jewish completely, so then you're still connected to your Jewishness. If we would appreciate that every time we do anything that goes against Judaism, we are disconnecting from our Jewishness at that moment. Yes, we're still Jewish, but at that moment, in that moment of time, in that act that we're doing, we're denying our Jewishness. If we would see it that way, we would not be able to do anything against the Torah, anything against Judaism. We would be paralyzed. Just like a Jew would not give up their Jewishness, convert to another religion, we wouldn't be able to make that move. We wouldn't be able to do anything. And so this monologue says that if a Jew who is so disconnected from their Jewish tradition, if they can insist on staying Jewish and they will refuse to give up their Jewishness, in spite of the fact that they do nothing in their lives to be Jewish, so then I, who am living a connected life, I'm trying to do the mitzvahs, trying to fulfill God's will, I am not going to make the mistake that even they wouldn't make. I'm not going to disconnect from Jewishness when I know that this act is going to disconnect me. I'm not going to be a fool and deny the truth like them. And this is Rabbi Shneur Zalman. This will work. If you get this right in your mind, if this is clear to you, if you buy into this, so then you can be a Beinoni. Because when you are faced with the opportunity to do something that is against God's will, that is against what Judaism says to do, that is against the Torah, if you stop and make this calculation, that what I'm about to do is denying my Jewishness, I'm about to bow down to an idol, I'm about to convert out of my religion, all you're going to do really is speak Lashon Hara. You're just about to say a few words that are gossipy, or make that joke that you weren't supposed to, or make a business deal that was dishonest, or eat a piece of food that isn't kosher. I'm just doing this little tiny act. But when I stop and say, this act is disconnecting me from my Jewishness, from my Jewish soul, is disconnecting me from God. If that is clear to you, you cannot do it. You will hold back. You will control that urge, and it will be out of the question. So this what Rabbi Shneur Zalman here has suggested is an extremely powerful tool to utilize that indestructible Jewish soul, that Jewish bond, and bring it to the fore in every act that we do. To see anything we do as being an affront to that. And this, he says, will work. Again, this won't work if we pay lip service to it. This will work if we internalize this message and utilize it in our battle against the animal soul. Because this is the way the divine soul feels. That in our infinite bond with the infinite God, every single act has infinite significance. And so if this is disconnecting me from God just now, today, in this moment, that's infinite. That's not just limited to today. It's an infinite thing. Any questions on that? No? Okay. So, if we would meditate on this idea, what would it take to get you to drop being Jewish? Let's test this idea. What Rabbi Shneur Zalman here is suggesting is that nothing will allow us to drop our Jewishness. There are things that are presented to us that could tempt us to drop our Jewishness. One of them is social acceptance. That what if being Jewish means that you're not going to get a position in university to study? There were times when Jews were not allowed in university. So being Jewish means that you're not going to get that position, or you're not going to be befriended by anyone. People are going to avoid you, and you're going to be a pariah, an outcast. So would you drop your Jewishness, just stop being Jewish in order to gain social acceptance? Or losing your job? What if somebody offers you a job, but you sense from things that they say that they're anti-Semitic? If you're Jewish, you're not going to get that job. Or you've got a job and you're going to lose it if they find out that you're Jewish. So Yom Tov is coming up, and by you saying, I'm not coming into work on Yom Tov, it's giving away that you're Jewish, and you're going to get in trouble. So would you drop your Jewishness for that? Hiding it temporarily is one thing, but would you give it up? Go to work on Yom Kippur so you can keep your job? Or what if there was a threat to your life, threat to your children's life? Would you give up being Jewish? Would you stop being Jewish? Just drop the identity altogether in order to save your life or to save your children's life? What about for $1 billion? Somebody offered you $1 billion, but the condition, I'm giving you $1 billion straight into your account. The only condition is that from now on you're not Jewish. You don't even have to convert to something else. Just you're a nothing, not Jewish. Would you do it for $1 billion? So what would the negotiation be? Maybe up it. $1 billion is not enough. Or I won't be Jewish on Tisha B'Av. I won't be Jewish. So if you think about all these things, I think all of us, if we'd be honest, and again, Tanya is about being honest with ourselves. If we'd be honest, all of these things would have a pull on us. I mean, if you're socially rejected for being Jewish, so that's hard. It's a question. Is it all worth it? If you're going to lose your job for being Jewish, that's difficult. If your life is being threatened, all of us can agree that to save life, even in the Jewish religion, saving life is an ultimate thing. So, and if your children are being threatened for being Jewish, certainly. Even the $1 billion one, which of all of these, probably it's the one we'd like to put at the bottom of the list. That just for money, I would But if we'd be honest, someone's offering us $1 billion. $1 billion is a lot of money. You could do a lot of good with that, even if you're not Jewish. So, what would we respond to these things? And the truth is that, by and large, the Jewish response to all of them has been no deal. That if it means losing my job, if it means being an outcast, if it means that you're threatening me or my children, and even if you're offering me $1 billion, that my Jewishness is just who I am. I cannot go against it. It's my reality. It's my identity. And so it simply is not an option. And so each one of us have a line. Some people might say, well, if my children's lives are being threatened, I don't know if it's worth it. I'm not sure about that one. My life is being threatened. Some of us would say $1 billion. If it was $1 million, I'm not sure, but $1 billion, maybe. Everyone has their line. So there are some people who would have to think this over. But everyone has a certain line that they wouldn't cross. That there's something about Jewishness that they will not give up. And what Tanya is suggesting is that we just need to shift that line to realize that any act we do that is immoral, that is wrong, that is evil, anytime we follow that animal soul, we're denying our Jewishness. We're giving in our Jewishness. It wasn't even for $1 billion. It was for a stupid joke that we said. Or it was for a silly, short-lived pleasure that we're going to enjoy, and we're giving up that Jewish connection. Yes, you're still Jewish afterwards. That's true. But even for a moment, I don't want to be disconnected. Even for a moment in my life, I don't want to be disconnected from my Jewishness, because that has eternal impact. And so this meditation is touching at the core of our identity, the deepest thing in our soul, and it's utilizing that power to face the daily challenges that the animal soul presents to us. And this, as Rabbi Shneur Zalman, can work. This is something that we can actually do, and this is what a Beinoni does on a daily, minute-by-minute basis. Maintains that level of connection. What that means is that if you could think of the drama of those people in the Spanish Inquisition. When they were given the choice to convert or die, this was like their moment of truth. What was going on at that moment? A Jew who, let's say, didn't live a very Jewish life, but at that moment they were told, convert to Catholicism or you're going to be killed, burnt at the stake or whatever they did. So at that moment, what came out was that powerful divine soul that said, I cannot be disconnected. I will give my life rather than be disconnected. The energy of that moment, the drama, the power of that moment, where the soul came out, the real true depth came out. What Rabbi Shneur Zalman is saying is, we can't leave that moment for some dramatic, life-threatening moment. We have to tap into that energy of our divine soul on a daily basis and live on a plane where we're ready to give up something for God. There's an idea that there's giving up your life, which is a very dramatic thing, but then there's giving up a little desire, a little urge. You didn't give up your life, you didn't die for it, but this particular urge you gave up. This particular pleasure that you were going to chase after, this self-gratifying pleasure, this thing that was immoral, was going to feel good, you had a push to do it, an urge to do it, to give that up. It's not as dramatic as giving up your entire life, but it is in miniature the same thing. And that we have to, if we live on that plane, that's when we're actually reaching the level of a Beinoni. And this is what a Beinoni does. They're living on that plane on a constant basis. And this is Rabbi Shneur Zalman, is what each one of us can strive for. It's totally realistic. We can do this. We have this power. It is different, however, continues Rabbi Shneur Zalman in chapter 14. It is different, however, with something that is entrusted to the heart. Namely, that evil should actually be despised in the heart and abhorred with absolute hatred, or even not quite so absolutely. This cannot be attained truly and sincerely except through the kind of ecstatic love and divine bliss which is a state of the world to come. Not every man can attain this state. This is talking about a tzaddik. That a person, what we're talking about till now was controlling your behavior. That is in our hands. To control the desires of your heart, that is not in our hands. Most of us cannot do that. To not have the urge in the first place, to not want to do the wrong thing, that is not in our hands. That evil should be despised by us with absolute hatred or not quite so absolute, which are the two levels of a tzaddik, the complete tzaddik and the incomplete tzaddik. That's not in our hands. This can't be truly and sincerely except through, if you reach the level of a tzaddik who has ecstatic love and divine bliss. That's like a person living in the world to come, in heaven already. That's a heavenly existence on earth. That's a tzaddik. That's out of our league. We're nowhere near that. And so this we cannot expect of ourselves. And we're not expected to reach this level. That's a tzaddik and it's not us. The Beinoni has the inner struggle, has the desire to do the wrong thing, is fighting with the evil inclination, the animal soul constantly. They don't have this level of bliss. They're not living in the world to come. They're very much down here in this world with its pleasures, and they're confronted by them. Not every man can attain this state of bliss. That's not our thing. That's not where we're supposed to be. That's not what we're attempting to do. With all this, we can understand the redundancy of the oath. Be a tzaddik and be not a rasha. Remember we quoted this earlier, that before our soul comes into this world, we make the oath, we're told, be a tzaddik and be not a rasha. That's the oath that it is administered to us, which is unintelligible at first glance. Since he's warned, be righteous, be a tzaddik, where is the need to put him on an oath that he shall not be wicked, a rasha? A tzaddik means a righteous person. So this is totally superfluous to make an oath. Be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha. If I'm a tzaddik, I'm not a rasha. So why is it worded in such a way that we're told to be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha, it doesn't make any sense at first glance. It's double language. So what does it mean? Why the double language? Anyone? Is it possible to be a tzaddik and a rasha? No. So if I made an oath, I'm going to be a tzaddik. Do I need to now make another oath and I'm not going to be a rasha? So with what we've studied until now, we can understand what this oath means. The answer is not everyone is privileged to become a tzaddik, nor has a person complete choice in this matter. And so he is warned in the second place, thou shalt at the very least not be wicked. Here the right of choice and freedom is extended to every person to check the drive of his heart's desire and to conquer his nature so that he shall not be wicked even for a moment throughout his life. What's the answer? What's the answer to the double language? Be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha?
By not being a rasha, then that is the best you can do, which is like a tzaddik for most people.
Okay, by not being a rasha, that's the best you can do. That's the closest you can get to being a tzaddik. So, be a tzaddik is then mitigated, is what we mean by that is at the very least don't be a rasha. So hang on a minute. Now the first part of the phrase doesn't make all that much sense. If the oath was do not be a rasha, if we made a promise before we came to this world, I will not be a rasha. So what does that mean I have to be? If I'm not a rasha, what am I? Well, a tzaddik or a beinoni. I've got two options, either a tzaddik or a beinoni. If I'm not a rasha, so then at least be a beinoni. So this, says Rabbi Shnei Zalman, is the meaning of the second part of the oath. Do not be a rasha means that at the very least don't be wicked. That you have choice. That you have free choice. That is in your hand. There is no person in the world that can say, I couldn't help being a rasha. Everyone has the freedom of choice to act correctly, to do the right thing, and to not go after your own heart's desires. So, therefore, to not be wicked, that's the very least. But he says that at the beginning here, that not everyone is privileged to become a tzaddik. So what's the first part of the oath? Be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha. The second part we now understand is as being, you've got to not let yourself be a rasha. Be a beinoni at the least. But what is be a tzaddik? How do we understand the first part of the oath? So explains Rabbi Shnei Zalman. What does this mean? We've explained why the oath says do not be a rasha. It means to be a beinoni. But why does it say be a tzaddik if that is in fact not possible for most of us? We cannot be a tzaddik. So it's not just that you can't fully make it. It's a bit too hard for you. It's not even possible. It's not even within your reach. So you and I made an oath that we're going to be a tzaddik. And that oath we cannot keep. We can't be a tzaddik. It's out of our reach completely. So Tanya explains, a person must set aside specific periods in which to commune with his soul in order to cultivate the abhorrence of evil. In regard to all pleasures of this world, the wise man foresees what becomes of them, for in the end they rot and become worms and dung. Rather, let him delight and rejoice in God by reflection on his infinity to the best of his capacity. He may well realize that he cannot attain to this degree with a full measure of truth except in illusion. Nevertheless, he should do his part in an effort to uphold the oath, be righteous, and God will do as he sees fit. So here Rabbi Shnei Zalman gives the first of a couple of responses to the question. That when we make an oath be a tzaddik, and we're not going to be able to be a tzaddik, that's true. On a general level, we cannot be a tzaddik. However, we do have to strive to try and cultivate within us the same sense of good and evil that a tzaddik has. The tzaddik doesn't just avoid evil, but is disgusted by evil. We do have to develop a bit of that. We do have to start to feel a bit of an abhorrence towards evil, even though we will never fully reach that level. We're never going to totally be disgusted by it because we've got evil within us. We're not pure souls, we're not tzaddikim. And therefore, we will always be somewhat attracted to evil. But nevertheless, you have to do what you can to try and engender within yourself a distaste for evil. So it's not enough to be a Beinoni that avoids evil but is still tempted by it. You have to actually try and develop a bit of a disgust towards it, a bit of a distaste towards it, on whatever level you're able to. Like we've said in earlier classes, that it could be, on the whole, you're never going to be a tzaddik, but maybe certain areas you can be a tzaddik. Maybe there are certain types of evil that you can come to avoid because you really don't want to. You can actually conquer your evil inclination and your desires for it. So you have to try. To the best of your ability, you do have to try to be a tzaddik. You have to fulfill the oath. You were made to make this oath because you are supposed to try and fulfill it to the best of your ability, and God will do as He sees fit. Meaning, God created you. If He created you in such a way where you can't be a tzaddik, okay, that's His thing. Your obligation is to strive on some levels to have a bit of an inkling, a taste of what a tzaddik is. All the while realizing that you will not be a tzaddik. So you do have to yearn for it, you have to work for it, towards it on some level. There have to be certain areas where evil becomes distasteful to you. You actually don't want it. You have to get past some battles. Each one of us have our moral struggles. The things that our weaknesses where we struggle, we try to do the right thing. But there are some battles that you have to start to get over. You have to start to graduate a little bit, move on a little bit. Some battles will be for the rest of your life. There'll always be moral battles and inner battles. The Beinoni is a struggler. That's your life sentence for the rest of your time in this world. There's going to be struggles. It doesn't mean you have to have the same struggle all over and over again on the same level. You do have to try and graduate a little bit. And so certain areas you have to try and move on. Once you've controlled the urge, then you have to start working on actually not wanting it anymore, getting past it. And some areas you'll be successful. You do your best and God will do what He sees fit to give you a certain level of success. Yeah, sure.
Would you say that there's a difference between doing something that's wrong and doing something that's evil? Or is anything that's wrong classified as evil?
Well, what are you calling wrong?
If you eat something that's not kosher.
As opposed to evil would be killing someone.
Evil, if you speak badly about somebody, I think that could be classified as evil.
Right. Okay. So there's in Torah thought there's two types of evil or immorality. There is between man and a fellow man, and between us and God. There are certain acts that don't affect anyone else in the world. They only affect our relationship with God, such as eating non-kosher. There are other acts that we do that don't only affect our relationship with God, but they also affect another person, such as stealing or speaking badly about somebody. And so they're both evil in that they're both transgressions of God's rules, of God's laws. Just the impact of one is worse than the other. When you hurt another person, so then you not only have to make amends with God, you also have to make amends with that person. And sometimes that is not possible. In our relationship with God, we can always fix it. There's nothing that a person can do that cannot be fixed between us and God. But there are things that if we impact another person, there are certain things that cannot be fixed with that other person. I mean, killing the person is one example. Speaking evil about a person is very difficult to fix with that person, even if they forgive you. And they really forgive you. But the negative energy that you've put out there into words that you've spread, you can't get it back. So in many ways, our sins against another person are deeper and worse. And so the wording, how you word it, whether call one wrong and one evil, all of them in the end are immoral, meaning against God's will. Because the Torah definition of evil is that which God does not want. That's the Torah definition. But yes, there are different grades of evil and different requirements of fixing that evil. Any other questions now? So we do have to attempt in at least certain areas of our life to reach the level of tzaddik, even though we're not going to be a tzaddik ever. Furthermore, habit becomes second nature. And this is a general rule, an important rule to remember. Habit becomes second nature. Therefore, if you accustom yourself to despise evil, it will to some extent really become despicable. Similarly, when you accustom yourself to find joy in God through reflection on His greatness, for when you make effort from below, it induces assistance from on high. Meaning that habit becomes second nature by becoming ritualized, by routine. You actually start to engender that routine. There's an idea that after our actions, our heart starts to follow. If you act in a way that despises negativity and evil, if you start to really find distasteful that which is evil, even though you're not feeling that way naturally, innately, like a tzaddik does, but the habit starts to make it that way. An example that most Jews can relate to is that many Jews find the idea of eating pig distasteful. Now the truth is, the world eats it and likes it. It's not a disgusting food. It's not dirty. It's not filthy. It's not unhygienic. It is something that many people enjoy very much. But somebody who has never eaten it and has always heard that it's not kosher and it's the most not kosher thing, after a while it becomes something that actually sounds disgusting. It isn't really. It's not. It couldn't be. But by engendering the habit of not eating it, by pushing it away, it actually becomes disgusting. To the point where if it was offered to you, you couldn't even look at it. You couldn't even think about it. That is habit becoming nature. By not doing it, by pushing it away, it becomes disgusting to you. That's like a tzaddik. Somebody who's actually disgusted by something that is not kosher or not or forbidden, being disgusted by it is being a tzaddik in that area. And this can happen on all levels. Speaking evil, speaking gossip, which for most of us is a pleasurable thing on some small level. We enjoy such a thing, to have the one up over somebody. That can actually become disgusting to you if you get out of the habit of doing it, and if you habituate yourself to see it as wrong. Then it's like, how could I possibly speak bad about another person? Remember here, and this is a very important point, we're not talking about being disgusted by other people's evil. We're not talking about looking down at other people and saying and looking them as being lowly. That's not a tzaddik. That's not righteousness. That's self-righteousness. That's the animal soul trying to make you feel righteous. A person who looks down at other people is a self-righteous person. That's not holy at all. Here we're talking about your own connection to evil. For you to speak bad about somebody disgusts you. For you to even think of such a thing. You can reach that. You're not a tzaddik, but you can reach the same or similar experience of a tzaddik by habituating yourself. The more you avoid a certain activity and the more you define it as disgusting for you, it actually starts to become that way. And so too in the joy of serving God. A tzaddik serves God with complete joy. Their whole heart is in it. We can reach that as well by habituating ourselves to try and do it. And here, Rabbi Shneur Zalman concludes the chapter with a fascinating idea, that perhaps a spirit from above will descend upon him, and he will merit that a part of the soul of a tzaddik will attach itself to him, so that he may serve God with true joy. Then will in truth be fulfilled in him the oath, be a tzaddik. What's he talking about here? Rabbi Shneur Zalman here is suggesting a fascinating thing. There's an idea in Kabbalah, and we'll just briefly look at it. There's a Kabbalistic concept called ibur, which literally means pregnancy, or a soul attaching itself to another soul. Just like there are stories of possession, where some demonic soul possesses another person, enters into their body and takes them over. There's an idea of a positive version of that, where the soul of a tzaddik, of a righteous person who has passed away, could connect itself to a living soul and give you a boost in your service of God. This, says Rabbi Shneur Zalman, is something that can happen to a person who has been living as a Beinoni, who has been controlling themselves, been living righteously, been doing the right thing, albeit with the inner struggle of still wanting to do evil, but they control themselves, they do the right thing. Doing that for a while and living on such a level, and then taking it a step further, trying to practice being a tzaddik, trying to experience what it's like to be a tzaddik by starting to despise the possibility of doing evil and having full joy, what the person may experience is that the soul of a tzaddik may attach itself to them, and they'll be able to serve God with the joy of a tzaddik. And then they will have fulfilled the promise, be a tzaddik, because by piggyback, if you excuse the expression, they are having a tzaddik soul enter into their soul. And therefore they'll be serving God on the level of a tzaddik. This is a mystical idea, a Kabbalistic idea, but it's something that perhaps on some level we may be able to experience. That there may be a time, maybe it's just a moment, where you feel a certain uplift, where you feel in your service of God as if you're soaring into the heavens. It could be that the soul of a tzaddik is attaching itself to your soul, and you're temporarily experiencing what it's like to be on that level. And this is the highest possibility for a Beinoni, where a Beinoni who is always going to be a Beinoni can actually get a little bit of an experience of a tzaddik. But even if we don't get there, even if we don't reach that level, what we certainly can reach is the level of the Beinoni that controls themselves. This is within everyone's reach. And the attempt to, on certain levels, find a disgust with evil and a passion for good, to actually internalize it similar as a tzaddik would. So in conclusion, what have we learned today? That anyone can be a Beinoni at any time. This is totally in our hands and within our reach. It's not unrealistic. If we would realize that a sin disconnects us from our Jewishness, we would never do it. And that's the contemplation, the monologue we have to have inside our head, that doing this act is disconnecting me from God. It's like bowing to an idol. It's like converting to another religion. I'm not going to do it. And that will control ourselves. We'll be able to hold back. And even if we can't be a tzaddik, we can certainly taste it in certain areas of our life, and at the very least have a little bit of an inkling of what a tzaddik is, even though we're never going to be that. So our exercise for the week is to try that monologue. When you feel tempted to do the wrong thing, try the monologue we said earlier. And if you knew that going through with it meant giving up your Jewish soul, would you do this? Would you go through with this thing? There's no way you would. If you make that real to you, so then even you and I can be a Beinoni any day of the week. Okay.